Professor Daniel Mercer's fingers trembled as he held the sepia-toned photograph. The morning light filtering through his office blinds cast thin bars across the image. A young Union soldier standing proudly in his uniform, right hand raised in a casual wave toward the camera. The inscription on the back, written in faded ink, read, "James Willis Thornton, 5th 10th Massachusetts Infantry, December 4th, 1862. This shouldn't exist, Daniel whispered to himself, setting down the photograph on his cluttered desk. At 53, Daniel had spent the last 20 years as a Civil War historian at Covington University in western Massachusetts. His specialty was the 5th 10th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, the regiment that had suffered devastating losses at the Battle of Antietam in September 1862. He'd published 3 books on the subject and was considered the foremost expert on that particular unit, which is why the photograph before him made no sense at all. Professor Mercer? A voice from the doorway pulled him from his thoughts. Abigail Chun, his graduate assistant, stood with a stack of papers clutched to her chest. "Sorry to interrupt. I've compiled those regiment rosters you asked for." Daniel gestured for her to enter. "Abby, come look at this. Tell me what you see." She approached carefully, setting down the papers before picking up the photograph. Civil War soldier, Union uniform, Massachusetts insignia. She flipped it over and read the inscription. December 1862. "Is this for your new research project?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight. James Willis Thornton was a sergeant in the 5th 10th Massachusetts. He died at Antietam on September 17, 1862. Abby's brow furrowed. Then the date must be wrong. It's not just the date. Daniel pulled a folder from his desk drawer and removed several photocopied letters. These are from Thornton's personal correspondence. His last letter was written the night before Antietam. His death was confirmed by multiple witnesses. His name appears on the casualty lists. His family received his personal effects in October 1862, so this photograph is mislabeled, Abby said with a shrug. Look at the photographic technique. It's a wet plate collodion process typical of that exact period. The uniform details are correct down to the regimental insignia. And I've seen Thornton in group photographs taken before Antietam. It's definitely him. Daniel's voice lowered. But here's the thing, Abby. 3 letters exist from his commanding officer to Thornton's family, describing how he fell during the fighting in the West Woods. They recovered his body. They buried him in a marked grave. A chill swept through the office despite the warm September air outside. "Where did you find this?" Abby asked, her voice hushed. "That's the other strange part. It was mailed to my home address. No return address, no note, just this photograph in a plain envelope." Abby carefully set the photograph down. "Maybe it's someone's idea of a prank? They know your research focus. A remarkably elaborate one, if so." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "The thing is I'm about to publish a paper on Thornton specifically. He kept one of the most detailed journals of any soldier in the regiment right up until the day before his death. I've spent months analyzing his accounts." The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, students crossed the quad, laughing and chatting in the autumn sunshine, unaware of the historical impossibilities sitting on Daniel's desk. "What are you going to do?" Abby finally asked. Daniel slid the photograph into a protective sleeve. "I'm going to find out who sent this and why. And I'm going to prove whether this photograph is genuine or an extremely sophisticated fake." As he spoke, his office phone rang. He picked it up, listened for a moment, then slowly lowered himself into his chair. "Yes," he said quietly. "I understand. I'll be there tomorrow." He hung up and looked at Abby, his face pale. "That was the Worcester Historical Society. They've just received a donation of Civil War artifacts from an anonymous source. Among them are previously unknown letters from James Thornton." He swallowed hard. Dated October and November 1862, the Worcester Historical Society occupied a stately 19th-century mansion on a quiet, tree-lined street. As Daniel climbed the broad stone steps, he couldn't shake the sense of unease that had followed him since yesterday's discovery. Eleanor Blackwood, the Society's curator and an old colleague, met him in the marble-floored foyer. In her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, she had the air of someone who took history's secrets personally. "Daniel," she greeted him with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I wouldn't have missed it. These letters, are they authenticated?" Eleanor led him through exhibition rooms displaying artifacts of Worcester County's past. "Preliminary analysis indicates they're genuine. The paper, ink, and handwriting match known Thornton letters. But the content ... double quotes," she trailed off, glancing at him. "That's why I called you specifically." They entered a climate-controlled room in the rear of the building. On a table lay 3 letters in protective archival sleeves, alongside a leather-bound journal. Daniel's heart raced as he pulled on the cotton gloves Eleanor offered him. Carefully, he lifted the first letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Thornton's, the same distinctive script Daniel had studied for months in the soldier's earlier correspondence. It was addressed to Thornton's sister, dated October 3, 1862, more than 2 weeks after the man had reportedly died. "Dearest Catherine," Daniel read aloud, "I write to you under strange circumstances which I cannot fully explain. You may have received word of my falling at Antietam. This was not false news. I remember the shell burst, the darkness that followed. Yet I awoke 3 days later some miles from the battlefield, taken in by a farming family who found me wandering, confused, and wounded. I have no memory of how I came to be there. The regiment believes me dead, and I have not yet revealed myself to them for reasons I shall explain when we meet. Tell Mother I am alive, but tell no one else. I shall return home when it is safe to do so." Daniel looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze. "This is impossible. The second letter is dated October 20th, Eleanor said quietly. "He describes hiding in a small Maryland town, afraid to return to his unit. He mentions recurring nightmares and feeling not quite himself." Daniel read through the second letter quickly, then moved to the third, dated November 5th. This one was shorter, the handwriting more erratic. "I fear something followed me back from that bloody field. I see the faces of the fallen when I close my eyes. They call to me, the family that took me in. They look at me strangely now. The youngest child screams when I enter the room. Yesterday I caught my reflection in a mirror, and for a moment I did not recognize the man staring back. I must return to Antietam. Something waits for me there." The silence in the archival room felt oppressive. Outside, rain had begun to fall, tapping gently against the windows. "And the journal?" Daniel asked, his mouth dry. "We've only skimmed it," Eleanor said. "But it appears to be Thornton's account of his experiences after Antietam through December 1862. The last entry is ... double quotes." She hesitated. "Disturbing." Daniel opened the journal carefully. The pages were filled with the same handwriting, though increasingly unsteady as the entries progressed. He flipped to the final page, dated December 7, 1860, 3 days after the photograph was taken. "I have seen what waits beyond the veil," the entry read. "They're coming back through. I was merely the first. The door is open now." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He closed the journal and removed his gloves. "Who donated these items?" he asked. Eleanor's expression tightened. "That's another peculiarity. They were left in a package outside our door yesterday morning. The security camera malfunctioned during the exact time frame they would have been delivered. The note accompanying them said only that they belonged in our collection and that you should be contacted immediately." Daniel ran a hand through his graying hair. "I received that photograph of Thornton the day before your items appeared. Someone is orchestrating this, but why? And how could they have created such convincing forgeries?" "I'm not convinced they are forgeries," Daniel said quietly. "The historical inconsistencies are obvious, but the physical evidence, the paper, ink, handwriting, all appear authentic." Eleanor frowned. "What are you suggesting? That James Thornton somehow survived a battle where multiple witnesses saw him die, never contacted his unit, and wrote these increasingly paranoid letters before disappearing again?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm not suggesting that at all. Whatever explanation exists, it's not that simple." He took out his phone and pulled up an image. "This is a photograph of Thornton's grave at Antietam. I visited it last year while researching my paper. The stone was weathered but legible, marking the final resting place of SGT, James W. Thornton, 510th Massachusetts, killed September 17, 1862. "Someone's playing an elaborate hoax," Eleanor said firmly. "Perhaps." Daniel wasn't convinced. "I'd like to borrow these materials for further study if possible." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "I'll have copies made. The originals need to stay here." As they walked back through the exhibition halls, Daniel noticed a small display case he hadn't seen on the way in. Inside was a tarnished silver pocket watch, its face cracked, the hands frozen at 9:17. "That's new," he remarked. Eleanor stopped. Yes, it came with the Thornton materials. According to the note, it belonged to him and was recovered from the battlefield. Daniel leaned closer. Something dark stained the inside of the glass, old blood, perhaps. The watch stopped at the approximate time Thornton's unit engaged in the West Woods, he said quietly. Eleanor met his gaze. "Daniel, what is going on here?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Abby. "Professor, someone broke into your office last night. Your Thornton files are gone." Rain pelted the windshield as Daniel drove back to Covington University, his mind racing faster than the wipers could clear the glass. The road ahead blurred, much like the boundaries between what he knew to be historically accurate and the impossible evidence now challenging those facts. Campus security met him outside his building, a deer-faced officer named Walters who led him upstairs with minimal conversation. Yellow tape crossed his office doorway, and inside the chaos was immediately apparent. Books had been swept from shelves. Filing cabinets stood open with papers scattered across the floor, and his computer monitor lay shattered on the desk. But the target of the break-in was clear. The locked drawer where he'd kept his research on James Thornton was empty, its lock broken. Cameras? Daniel asked, surveying the damage. Officer Walters shook his head. Disabled. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Abby arrived moments later, breathless from running across campus. "Professor, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Daniel assured her. "Just confused and increasingly concerned." After the security officer left, promising a full report that Daniel doubted would yield anything useful, he and Abby began sorting through the mess. "The photograph is gone too?" Abby asked, helping him gather papers from the floor. "No, I had that with me." Daniel patted his briefcase, along with copies of the new materials from Worcester. He quickly briefed her on what he'd found at the Historical Society. Abby listened intently, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is beyond bizarre," she said when he finished. "Someone is going to extraordinary lengths to what? Discredit your research? Scare you? Or lead me somewhere," Daniel murmured. "Every piece has been deliberately placed in my path." As they continued cleaning, Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number. "Professor Mercer," he answered cautiously. Silence, then a strange, distorted voice. "Do you believe in ghosts, Professor?" Daniel's hand tightened around the phone. "Who is this? History doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it claws its way back. What do you want?" "The truth about Thornton. About what happened after Antietam." The voice lowered. "About what's happening now." "Who are you?" Daniel demanded again. "You already have my name. December 12th, midnight. The old Miller farm at Antietam. Come alone if you want answers." The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly, aware of Abby's concerned gaze. "What is it?" she asked. "Someone wants me to go to Antietam, to the site where Thornton's unit fought." "You're not actually considering it?" Alarm tinged her voice. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his laptop and damaged in the break-in, and opened his research files. "There's something I didn't mention about Thornton's last known letter before Antietam," he said, navigating through folders. "Something I've never included in my published work." He found the file and turned the screen toward Abby. It showed a scan of a letter dated September 16th, 1862, the night before the battle. "Read the last paragraph," he instructed. Abby leaned forward. "Dreams again last night. The same dark field, the same shadowed figures rising from the ground. They speak to me in voices I almost recognize. They promise we will meet tomorrow. I have not told the others of these visions for fear they would think me mad or cowardly before the coming fight. Yet I cannot shake the certainty that I have glimpsed beyond the veil of what is to come. If I fall tomorrow, know that something of me will remain. I have seen it." She looked up, her face pale. "This is ... unsettling. Thornton's family kept this letter private for generations. I was only granted access to it 5 years ago, on the condition I not publish its contents. They felt it showed mental instability that might tarnish his memory." Daniel closed the laptop. "But what if it wasn't instability? What if Thornton somehow sensed what was coming?" "You can't seriously believe I don't know what to believe anymore," Daniel interrupted. "But I do know that someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to connect these pieces for me. The photograph, the letters, the journal, the watch, and now this call." He began gathering his essential belongings. "I'm going to Antietam. Professor, this could be dangerous. At minimum, it's likely someone manipulating you. At worst, ... double quotes." She didn't finish the thought. "That's why I'm not waiting until December 12th, Daniel said, a plan forming. "I'm going tomorrow. Whoever set this up will be preparing for me to arrive on their schedule. I need to disrupt their timeline." Abby grabbed her jacket. "Then I'm coming with you." Daniel started to protest, then recognized the determination in her expression, the same look he'd seen in the mirror that morning. "Pack light," he conceded. "We leave at dawn." As they exited the ransacked office, Daniel paused to look back. For a moment, in the shadows of the disordered room, he thought he saw a figure in a Union uniform watching silently from the corner. He blinked, and it was gone. Just his imagination, surely. The power of suggestion after a day immersed in Thornton's increasingly disturbing narrative. But as he pulled the door closed, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited at Antietam had already found him here. The 6-hour drive to Shopsburg, Maryland, passed mostly in silence. Daniel had slept poorly, his dreams invaded by Civil War battlefields and shadowy figures that seemed to watch him from just beyond the firelight. Once he'd jerked awake, certain someone was standing at the foot of his bed, but found only darkness. Now, as they crossed into Maryland under a steel-gray sky, Abby finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking about Thornton's journal," she said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Those final entries about seeing beyond the veil and things coming back through. It reads like a man suffering from severe post-traumatic stress, maybe combined with brain injury." Daniel nodded. That would be the rational explanation. Thornton survives Antietam somehow, suffers head trauma, experiences delusions, and documents his deteriorating mental state. But you don't believe that's all it is? "I don't know what I believe," Daniel admitted. "The evidence contradicts itself. Multiple witnesses confirmed his death. His grave exists. Yet here we have documents suggesting he lived for months afterward, growing increasingly paranoid or ... double quotes or what?" Daniel hesitated. "Or increasingly aware of something most people can't perceive." They arrived at Antietam National Battlefield shortly after noon. The visitor center was quiet, tourism having slowed with the approach of winter. A light mist hung over the rolling fields where, on a single September day in 1862, more than 22,000 men had been killed, wounded, or gone missing, still the bloodiest single day in American military history. Daniel approached the park ranger at the information desk, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Afternoon," the ranger greeted them. "Welcome to Antietam." "Looking for anything in particular today?" "The Westwoods," Daniel replied. "Specifically, the area where the 5th Massachusetts Infantry fought." The ranger's expression shifted subtly. "You're a historian?" "Yes, Daniel Mercer, Covington University." "This is my assistant, Abby Chun." Recognition flickered in the ranger's eyes. "Dr. Mercer, I've read your work on the 5th. Didn't realize you were visiting today. It was a somewhat spontaneous trip." The ranger, his nameplate read. Harrigan pulled out a map. "The 5th Massachusetts moved through this section of the West Woods where they encountered heavy Confederate fire from 3 sides. They suffered casualties of nearly 75%. Daniel nodded. "I'm particularly interested in the movements of Sergeant James Thornton." Harrigan's hand froze above the map. After a moment's hesitation, he looked up, his expression guarded. "May I ask why?" The question seemed oddly pointed. Daniel exchanged a glance with Abby before answering carefully. "I'm researching discrepancies in accounts of his death at Antietam." Harrigan studied him for a long moment, then glanced around the empty visitor center before lowering his voice. "You're the second person this week asking about Thornton." Daniel felt a chill run through him. "Who else was asking?" "A woman. Didn't give her name. Asked specific questions about where Thornton fell, if any personal effects had been recovered, whether there were any unusual reports associated with his death." Harrigan frowned. "When I asked why she wanted to know, she said something strange about doors swinging both ways and left abruptly." "What did she look like?" Abby asked. "Mid-30s, dark hair, expensive clothes. Had an intensity about her." He hesitated. "She left this for anyone who asked about Thornton again." He reached under the counter and produced a sealed envelope with Daniel's name written on it in elegant script. Daniel accepted it with a sense of inevitability. "Thank you. The Westwoods Trail starts behind the visitor center," Harrigan said, returning to his professional demeanor. "The 5th Massachusetts marker is about half a mile in." He paused. "Dr. Mercer, be careful out there. The battlefield can be disorienting, especially in weather like this." Outside, the mist had thickened, obscuring the distant fields. Daniel opened the envelope as they walked. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a quote, "What are the dead? They are not gone from us. They are merely waiting on the other shore of the same river we all must cross. Sometimes in places where the veil grows thin, we might hear their whispers or glimpse their shadows. And sometimes, rarely, one might find his way back across those dark waters, but never alone, never unchanged." Below the quote was a set of coordinates and a time, 3:17 p.m. Daniel checked his watch. It was just after 1:30. "That's less than 2 hours from now," Abby said, reading over his shoulder. They followed the trail into the West Woods, the mist dampening sounds and limiting visibility to a few dozen yards. The trees stood like sentinels, their bare November branches forming a skeletal canopy overhead. Few other visitors braved the weather. They encountered only one elderly couple heading back toward the visitor center, who nodded silently as they passed. The marker for the 5th Massachusetts stood in a small clearing, a simple stone monument commemorating the men who had fought and died there. Daniel approached it reverently, running his fingers over the carved insignia. "Thornton would have been here," he said quietly, "right here when the Confederate forces outflanked them." Abby hung back slightly, her expression troubled. "These coordinates, they're not for this monument, are they?" Daniel consulted his phone's GPS. "No. They're about a quarter mile further in, away from the main trail." Why am I not surprised? She zipped her jacket higher against the chill. So we're really doing this? Following mysterious directions from an unknown woman to an isolated location on a foggy battlefield? We came this far, Daniel said, and I need answers. They moved deeper into the woods, following a narrow, less maintained path. The mist thickened around them, muffling their footsteps and creating the unsettling impression that the world beyond their immediate surroundings had ceased to exist. Daniel checked the GPS again. We should be close. They emerged into another small clearing, this one unmarked by any monument. At its center stood the remains of an old well, its stone circle partially collapsed, a rusted metal cover securing what remained of the opening. The Miller farm well, Daniel realized aloud. It was a landmark during the battle. Soldiers used it as a reference point in their accounts. Someone's been here recently, Abby observed, pointing to fresh footprints in the damp soil around the well. Daniel approached cautiously. Something had been placed on top of the well cover, a small wooden box, aged and weathered, with brass fittings tarnished green with time. He picked it up carefully. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a Union Army identification disc, a simple metal tag that soldiers had begun to use informally during the Civil War, precursors to modern dog tags. The name stamped into its surface, J.W. Thornton, 5th Mass. This shouldn't exist either, Daniel said, his voice hushed. Identification discs weren't standard issue. Some soldiers made their own or purchased them privately, but Thornton wasn't documented as having one, and it should have been buried with him or returned to his family. Abby had gone very still, her gaze fixed on something beyond the well. Professor, she whispered. Daniel looked up. Through the mist, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure in a Union uniform. The distance and fog obscured details, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The shape of the cap, the cut of the jacket. Hello? Daniel called, his voice sounding strangely flat in the misty air. The figure remained motionless. Daniel took a step forward. James Thornton. At the name, the figure retreated a step, still facing them. Wait. Daniel moved toward it, but Abby grabbed his arm. Professor, don't. The figure continued backing away until the mist swallowed it completely. Daniel stood frozen, the identification disc cold in his palm, uncertainty warring with the historian's need to pursue evidence wherever it led. Was that ... double quotes? Abby couldn't finish the question. Someone in a Civil War uniform, Daniel said firmly, trying to ground himself in rationality. Probably our mystery coordinator, creating theatrical effects to enhance their game. Even as he said it, he knew how inadequate the explanation sounded. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. Unknown number. Not all who fall in battle find their way home. Some remain caught between worlds. The door opens wider. December 12th, midnight. The final piece awaits. As he read the message, the mist around them seemed to deepen, swirling in patterns that almost resembled human forms. The temperature dropped sharply. Their breath fogged in the sudden cold. We should go, Abby said urgently. Now. Daniel nodded, slipping the identification disc into his pocket. As they turned to leave, a whisper seemed to float on the air, so faint he couldn't be sure he'd actually heard it. Help us. They retraced their steps quickly, the path somehow seeming longer than before. Twice, Daniel thought he glimpsed movements among the trees, figures in uniform appearing and vanishing between one blink and the next. Just tricks of light and fog, he muttered, more to himself than to Abby. When they finally emerged from the woods, the visitor center stood as a beacon of normality in the distance. They hurried toward it, neither speaking until they reached the parking lot. What do we do now? Abby asked, her usual composure noticeably shaken. Daniel checked his watch. 3:17 p.m. exactly. The time indicated in the note. We go back to the hotel, he decided. Review what we've learned. And decide whether to return on December 12th. As they drove away from the battlefield, Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. For an instant, he thought he saw a line of Union soldiers standing at the edge of the woods, watching their departure. He blinked, and there was only mist. Back at their small hotel in Shopsburg, Daniel spread their growing collection of Thornton artifacts across the desk. The photograph, copies of the letters and journal entries from the Worcester Historical Society, the quote left by the mysterious woman, and now the identification disc from the well. We're missing something, he said, studying the items for what felt like the 100th time. These pieces tell a story, but it's incomplete. Abby sat cross-legged on one of the room's twin beds, her laptop open before her. I've been researching folktales and legends about Antietam, she said. There's a substantial body of ghost stories associated with the battlefield, as you'd expect. Many visitors and park rangers have reported apparitions in uniform. Phantom sounds of battle, unexplained cold spots. Standard haunting tropes, Daniel nodded. Common to most major battlefields. But there are a few accounts specifically mentioning the Westwoods that stand out. 3 separate reports from the 1920s describe encounters with a Union soldier who approaches visitors, apparently trying to communicate something urgent before disappearing. 2 of these reports specifically mention the soldier pointing toward the old well. Daniel's interest sharpened. Any mentions of Thornton specifically? No, but there is this. She turned her laptop to show him a scanned newspaper clipping from 1888. The headline read, "Strange Occurrence at Antietam Battlefield. Witness claims encounter with long-dead soldier." The article described how a Massachusetts veteran revisiting the battlefield had claimed to encounter a former comrade who had died at Antietam. The soldier allegedly warned that the door between worlds was weakening and that they would soon find ways to return. The veteran, named William Chambers, was described as having become increasingly reclusive after the encounter, filling journals with what the newspaper delicately called disturbed writings before his death 6 months later. Chambers served in the 5th Massachusetts, Abby said quietly. I checked the regimental rosters. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The same unit as Thornton. There's more, Abby continued. The article mentions that Chambers was part of a burial detail after the battle. He helped bury the dead from his regiment, including a sergeant whose body reportedly disappeared 3 days after burial, causing considerable distress among the superstitious in the unit. No name given for the sergeant? No, but the timing fits with what we know about Thornton. Daniel picked up the journal copies, flipping to the final entries. I have seen what waits beyond the veil, he read aloud. They are coming back through. I was merely the first. The door is open now. What if, double quotes, Abby hesitated. What if Thornton wasn't suffering from delusions? What if he actually experienced something at Antietam that he couldn't explain? Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang, the same unknown number from before. Professor Mercer, he answered cautiously. You came early. The same distorted voice. Curious and clever. You haven't seen everything yet. Who are you? What do you want? The truth, Professor. The same as you. A pause. You found the disc. Yes. Have you examined it closely? The other side? Daniel reached for the identification disc, turning it over. On the back, barely visible through years of tarnish, were tiny engraved words he hadn't noticed before. He squinted to read them. Between worlds. Between times. What does this mean? He demanded. December 12th is significant, the voice continued, ignoring his question. The anniversary of Thornton's final documented appearance. The last time the door was opened wide enough for clear communication. Communication with what? Not what, Professor. Who? The voice softened slightly. They've been waiting a long time, trapped between worlds. Thornton found a way to reach back but couldn't fully return. None of them cannot without help. Who is they? The lost ones. Soldiers who died at Antietam but never truly passed on. Their spirits caught in a kind of limbo. Thornton was different. He briefly managed to manifest physically after death to interact with the living world. The letters, the journal, the photograph, all evidence of his temporary return. Daniel's academic mind rebelled against this explanation, even as the evidence before him increasingly resisted conventional interpretation. Why contact me? Why now? Your research into Thornton created a connection. Your deep immersion in his life and death made you receptive, and the timing is right. December 12, 2023, exactly 161 years since Thornton's final recorded presence. The cycle has returned to its beginning. Daniel caught Abby's worried gaze across the room. What happens on December 12th? The veil will thin again, as it does cyclically. They can reach through more strongly then. With the right conditions, the right ritual, perhaps they can finally cross over completely. Find peace. Or what? Or something else might use the opening, something that's been waiting much longer. The voice grew urgent. You need to understand what Thornton discovered. Why his experience was unique. The answer lies in his family history. Look deeper, Professor. The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. They want me to perform some kind of ritual at the battlefield. On December 12th. That's less than a month away, Abby said. And this is starting to sound dangerous, not just strange. Daniel turned back to his laptop. We need more information about Thornton's family. His fingers flew across the keyboard. His military records don't mention anything unusual about his background. Standard details: born 1836 in Worcester, parents James Sr. and Mary Thornton. One sister Catherine ... double quotes. He paused, frowning at something on the screen. What is it? Abby asked. His mother's maiden name was Miller. Miller, as in the Miller farm, where the well is located. Daniel continued reading. Mary Miller was born on that property in 1801. The family had owned the land for generations before selling it in 1850. A few years before the battle. So Thornton had a connection to the exact spot where he died, Abby said slowly. That's... significant. There's something else. Daniel navigated to another document. Local historical records for the Miller family. Apparently, there were persistent rumors that Mary Miller's grandmother, Thornton's great-grandmother, practiced folk magic. Nothing malevolent, mostly healing and protection charms. But she was known locally as someone who could speak with those beyond. A spiritualist? That wasn't uncommon in early America. No, but this predates the spiritualist movement by decades. And there's a specific mention here of a ritual involving a well on the property that supposedly served as a door between worlds. The room seemed to grow colder as the implications settled between them. Thornton died on land his ancestors had claimed was spiritually significant, Abby summarized, at a place they specifically identified as a doorway between worlds, and somehow he found a way back through, at least temporarily. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the weight of this historical puzzle pressing on him. But why reach out now? Why orchestrate this elaborate trail of breadcrumbs leading me to Antietam on a specific date? Abby's expression was troubled. The voice mentioned a ritual, and something else possibly coming through the doorway. Something that's been waiting much longer. That doesn't sound benevolent, Professor. Daniel picked up the photograph of Thornton, the impossible image of a dead man waving to the camera months after his documented death. The soldier's expression, which he had initially read as a casual smile, now seemed tinged with something else. A warning, perhaps, or a plea. We're missing a crucial piece, he said. Something that explains why Thornton was able to return, however briefly, and what he discovered when he did. His phone buzzed with a text message. Again, the unknown number, the final pieces in Worcester, where it all began. His home. Daniel looked up at Abby. We need to go to Worcester. To the Thornton family home. Do we even know if it still exists? Yes, Daniel said, remembering a detail from his research. It was preserved as a historical site, and the Thornton family home stood at the end of a quiet street in Worcester's historic district, a well-preserved federal-style building with dark green shutters and a slate roof. A small plaque beside the door identified it as a heritage site, though it appeared to be closed to the public, the windows dark behind lace curtains. Daniel and Abby arrived late afternoon the following day, having driven straight from Maryland. Exhaustion pulled at them both, but the urgency of their quest kept fatigue at bay. No lights, Abby observed as they parked across the street. Doesn't look like it's open for tours. According to the Historical Society records, it's only open by appointment during winter months, Daniel said. But our mysterious guide seems to think there's something here we need to find. They approached the front door cautiously. Daniel was reaching for the antique brass knocker when he noticed the door was slightly ajar. That's convenient, Abby murmured. And not at all creepy. Daniel pushed the door open. Hello? Anyone here? No response. The entryway was dimly lit by what little daylight filtered through the windows. Period furnishings or excellent reproductions filled the space. A delicate side table supporting a silver card tray. A grandfather clock ticking solemnly in the corner. A horsehair settee positioned beneath an oil portrait of a severe-looking man in 1840s attire. James Thornton Sr. Daniel identified the portrait subject. I've seen this painting in historical records. They moved deeper into the house, footsteps muffled by worn oriental rugs. The rooms were meticulously maintained, presenting the appearance of a home whose occupants had simply stepped out momentarily rather than a museum piece. In the parlor, a book lay open on a reading table, a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles resting beside it. Someone's been here recently, Abby said, touching the teacup on a nearby side table. This is still warm. Daniel examined the open book. A family Bible, he realized, with a handwritten record of births, marriages, and deaths. The page displayed the Thornton family entries from the mid-19th century. James Willis Thornton's death was recorded simply, September 17, 1862, Antietam. But beneath it, in faded ink of a slightly different shade, someone had added, returned December 4, 1862, lost again December 12, 1862. This edition isn't in the photographed records I've studied, Daniel said, tracing the words without touching them. This Bible was documented by historians in the 1950s. These extra lines about Thornton returning weren't present then, so either someone added them recently as part of this elaborate game, or double quotes, or they've been here all along, somehow hidden from previous researchers. Daniel finished grimly. A floorboard creaked somewhere above them. Both froze, listening intently. After a moment, soft footsteps moved across the ceiling, followed by the distinct sound of a door closing. We're not alone, Abby whispered. Daniel nodded toward the staircase visible through the parlor doorway. By unspoken agreement, they moved toward it together, each step careful and deliberate on the ancient wood. The second floor held 4 bedrooms arranged around a central landing. 3 doors stood open, revealing period-appropriate chambers. The 4th door at the end of a short hallway was closed. Daniel approached it slowly, aware of Abby close behind him. He knocked gently. "Hello? We're not here to intrude. We're just looking for information about James Thornton." Silence. Then, just as Daniel reached for the doorknob, a woman's voice spoke from the other side. He wasn't supposed to come back. None of them are. But he found a way. Daniel's hand froze. "Who are you?" "A guardian. A keeper of histories, both the ones written down and, the ones deliberately forgotten. Are you the one who sent me the photograph, who arranged the materials at the Historical Society?" A pause. "Yes, because you were already too close to the truth. Better to guide you properly than let you stumble blindly into what's coming." "What is coming?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the chill spreading through him. "A breach, a thinning of barriers that should remain solid." The voice lowered. "Thornton's bloodline carried certain ... sensitivities, abilities passed down from his great-grandmother. The Miller connection. When he died on that family ground, powerful ground, it created a unique circumstance. A door left partially open, and now that door is opening wider," Daniel guessed, recalling the texts and phone calls. "Every 161 years, the alignment returns. December 12th approaches, Professor. The same date Thornton finally disappeared after his brief return. The cycle completes. Why 161 years specifically? 7 generations of Millers lived on that land before Thornton died there. 7 times 23. The numbers have meaning." Daniel exchanged a glance with Abby, who looked as skeptical as he felt, despite the mounting impossibilities surrounding them. "What do you want from me?" he asked the closed door. "To understand. To witness. Perhaps to help close what should never have been opened." A sigh filtered through the wood. "His room contains what you need. The final piece? This room? Thornton's room? Yes, I've left it prepared for you. Will you show yourself?" Another pause. "Not yet. There's no time. Read what he left behind. Then decide whether to return to Antietam on the 12th. Footsteps retreated from the door, but not toward the landing. Instead, they seemed to move deeper into the room, fading impossibly as if the chamber extended much farther than the house's dimensions would allow. Daniel tried the doorknob. It turned easily, and the door swung open to reveal a bedroom frozen in time, a young man's chamber from the mid-19th century, a narrow bed with a handmade quilt, a writing desk beneath the window, bookshelves filled with volumes on history, strategy, and natural philosophy, a Union uniform hanging from a peg on the wall, but no sign of the woman who had been speaking to them moments before. "That's not possible," Abby said, moving past Daniel to check the closet, the only place someone could conceivably hide. It was empty save for period clothing and a travel trunk. Where did she go? Daniel was drawn to the writing desk where a leather journal lay open, a pen resting in the inkwell beside it. The handwriting matched Thornton's from the other documents they'd examined. "This appears to be his personal journal from before the war," Daniel said, carefully examining the pages. "Not the one from the Historical Society that documented his experiences after Antietam." He flipped through it, scanning entries that documented ordinary life in Worcester, Thornton's decision to enlist, his training with the 5th Massachusetts. Toward the end, the entries grew more disturbed, describing dreams of a battlefield he had never seen, premonitions of his own death. The final entry before he left for war caught Daniel's attention. Grandmother Miller's stories seemed less fanciful now that the dreams have intensified. "She always claimed our bloodline could perceive thin places, locations where the barrier between worlds diminishes. The old well on the family property was such a place," she insisted. "A door that swings both ways if opened with purpose. I dream of it now, though I've never seen it in waking life. In these dreams, shadows gather around it, watching, waiting for someone to lift the cover and reach through. I fear what this portends as I march toward Maryland. Something tells me I will see that well before this war ends." Daniel read the passage aloud to Abby, who had been examining other items in the room. "So Thornton was aware of his family's beliefs before he died at Antietam," she said. "He even dreamed of the well where he would eventually fall." "And where we found his identification disc," Daniel added. Abby picked up a small wooden box from the bedside table, similar to the one they'd found at the well, but larger. "Professor, look at this." Inside lay several items, a faded daguerreotype of a stern-faced older woman in 1830s dress, a small cloth pouch containing what appeared to be dried herbs and small stones, and a folded paper sealed with wax bearing an unusual symbol, a circle bisected by a vertical line with 3 horizontal marks crossing it. The woman must be his grandmother, Miller, Daniel guessed, examining the daguerreotype. The one who told him stories about the thin places. Carefully he broke the wax seal on the folded paper. Inside was a detailed drawing of the well at Antietam, surrounded by precise markings and text in a language he didn't recognize. At the bottom in English was written, to close the door. Blood of the bloodline must be offered freely where 2 worlds touch. Speak the names of 7 generations. Turn the key in the lock. This looks like instructions for a ritual, Daniel said quietly. A ritual involving blood, Abby added uneasily. Professor, this is venturing far beyond historical research into something that feels ... dangerous. Daniel refolded the paper. I know it sounds fantastic, impossible, but the evidence keeps pointing in directions I can't explain through conventional, historical analysis. His phone buzzed with another text. Now you understand what must be done. December 12th, midnight. The well. Bring what you have found. Come alone. You can't seriously be considering this, Abby protested, reading the message over his shoulder. Daniel looked around the room that had belonged to a man who died over 160 years ago, a man who had somehow returned, however briefly, to leave warnings about doors between worlds. I don't know what I believe, he admitted, but as a historian I can't walk away from this. Not when the evidence, however inexplicable, keeps mounting. He carefully placed the items from the box into his bag along with the journal. We're taking these? Borrowing, Daniel corrected. I'll return them once I understand their significance. As they turned to leave the room, the temperature plummeted suddenly. Their breath fogged in the chill air. The door, still ajar from their entrance, swung closed with a decisive click. In the corner of the room, the shadows deepened, coalescing into a human-shaped darkness. No features were discernible, just a void in the rough shape of a man in uniform. Help us, came a whisper, the same words they'd heard at Antietam. The door. Before they come through. The shadowy figure raised an arm, pointing at Daniel, then at the items in his bag. Who are they? Daniel asked, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. Who's trying to come through? The shadow seemed to flicker like a candle flame in a draft.
The fallen.
The lost. The hungry ones. The voice grew fainter. Not all who died on that field deserved to return. The figure dissolved, the darkness receding back into ordinary shadows. The temperature gradually returned to normal. Daniel and Abby stood frozen for several long moments before either spoke. I think, Abby finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, we just saw the ghost of James Thornton. Daniel nodded slowly. And I think he's warning us about something worse than ghosts. The drive back to Covington University passed in tense silence, both Daniel and Abby lost in their own thoughts. The items from Thornton's room lay in Daniel's bag like artifacts from another world, which, in a sense, he was beginning to believe they were. Back in his office, now restored to some semblance of order after the break-in, Daniel spread everything on his desk. The photograph, the journal copies, the identification disc, the ritual instructions, and the small pouch of herbs and stones from Thornton's room. We need to approach this systematically, he told Abby, falling back on academic methodology to ground himself amid increasingly supernatural evidence. Let's establish what we know with reasonable certainty. Abby nodded, pulling out her notebook. James Thornton died at Antietam on September 17, 1862. Multiple witnesses confirmed this. He was buried in a marked grave. His family had a history connected to folk practices, Daniel continued. Specifically, beliefs about thin places where barriers between worlds could be crossed. The Miller farm well was considered such a place. Somehow, Thornton returned door appeared to return after his death. He was photographed, wrote letters and journal entries, and was physically present enough to leave artifacts behind. He disappeared again on December 12, 1862. And now, 161 years later, something is happening at that same location. Something connected to Thornton and possibly other soldiers who died there. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The rational explanation is that we're being elaborately hoaxed. Someone with extensive knowledge of Civil War history in the Thornton family specifically has manufactured evidence and arranged a series of theatrical encounters to convince us of a supernatural occurrence. But why? Abby asked. What would be the purpose? I don't know, Daniel admitted. Academic rivalry taken to an extreme? An attempt to discredit my research? A psychological experiment? None seem adequate explanations for the effort involved. Which leaves the irrational explanation, Abby said quietly, that Thornton actually did return briefly after death, that some kind of doorway exists at Antietam, that something is trying to use that doorway now. Daniel picked up the ritual instructions. studying the strange symbols surrounding the drawing of the well. I need to know what language this is. He photographed the document and sent it to a colleague in the linguistics department. Within an hour, he had a response. This appears to be a heavily modified form of Scots Gaelic with elements of a cipher system. Would need more examples to attempt translation. Where did you find this fascinating document? That tracks with what we know of the Miller family history, Daniel told Abby. They emigrated from Scotland in the early 1700s, settling first in Pennsylvania before moving to the Maryland territory. So the ritual instructions are in some family-specific variant of Gaelic? That would help keep the knowledge restricted to bloodline members. Exactly. Daniel examined the pouch of herbs and stones. And these materials are probably components of whatever ritual was intended. His phone rang the same unknown number. You found what you needed, the distorted voice stated when he answered. Yes, Daniel confirmed. Though I still have questions. Who are you? Why involve me in this? I am a descendant of Catherine Thornton, James's sister. Our family has carried the burden of knowledge for generations, watching the cycle approach its completion again. As for why your research into Thornton created a connection. Your immersion in his life and death made you receptive to what's happening. What exactly is happening? The barrier thins cyclically. December 12th marks the 161st anniversary of when Thornton finally vanished after his brief return. On that date, the door will open widest, and something wants to come through, Daniel guessed. Many things. The souls of soldiers trapped between worlds, some innocent, some not. During life, all were men. In death, some have become ... something else. Thornton was one of the few who understood what was happening. He tried to warn others to close the door before the worst could come through. The ritual instructions mention blood of the bloodline. Does that mean I'm expected to perform this ritual? It would be best performed by a Miller descendant, yes. Daniel frowned. I'm not related to the Miller family. A pause. Are you certain, Professor? Have you traced your maternal grandmother's line back to the 1850s? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. His maternal grandmother's maiden name had been Gardner. He knew little about her family history beyond that. What are you suggesting? Check your ancestry, Professor. You'll find a Gardner married a Miller daughter in 1847. The bloodline continues through you, diluted but present. Why do you think you've been so drawn to the 5th Massachusetts? To Thornton specifically. Family calls to family across time. Daniel's mind raced. He had never considered a personal connection to his research subject. The idea seemed fantastic, yet, I need to verify this, he said finally. Of course. But time grows short. December 12th approaches. The ritual must be performed precisely at midnight when the barrier is thinnest. And if I refuse? The voice grew colder. Then what comes through may not be contained. Thornton's temporary return was merely a harbinger. The full opening occurs once every 161 years. We can close the door permanently with the ritual lore. Leave it open for whatever waits on the other side. The call ended. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. She's claiming you're related to Thornton's family, Abby asked, having heard his side of the conversation. Distantly through my grandmother. Daniel was already typing on his laptop, accessing genealogical databases. It would explain some coincidences, my fascination with this specific regiment. My focus on Thornton ... goes, or it could be someone who's researched your family history to make their hoax more convincing, Abby countered. Daniel continued searching through records, moving backward through generations of his family tree. When he reached his great-great-grandmother, he stopped, staring at the screen. Elizabeth Gardner, née Miller, he read aloud. Born 1828 in Worcester County, Massachusetts. Further research confirmed what the caller had suggested. Elizabeth Miller had been the granddaughter of Mary Miller, Thornton's cousin. A distant connection, but a blood relation nonetheless. This doesn't mean the supernatural elements are real, Abby said, though her voice lacked conviction. It just means whoever is orchestrating this has done thorough research. Daniel wasn't listening. He'd opened Thornton's journal again, reading entries he'd skimmed earlier. One passage now jumped out at him. Grandmother spoke of guardians in each generation. Those who would recognize the signs when the cycle returned. Not all of Miller blood would feel the pull, she said, but those who did would know it in their bones, in their dreams. They would be drawn to the history, to the stories, to the place where the door stands. When the time came, they would return to close what should never have been opened. Daniel closed the journal. I need to go back to Antietam. On December 12th. Professor, this is veering into dangerous territory. Even if there's some truth to this, especially if there's truth to this, we don't know what we're dealing with, which is why I need to understand it. Daniel's voice was firm. As a historian, as a potential Miller descendant, even just as someone who's become involved, I need to see this through. Then I'm coming with you, Abby insisted. Daniel shook his head. The text said to come alone. The text from an anonymous source who claims ghosts are trying to come through a magical doorway at a Civil War battlefield? That's who you're taking safety advice from now? Despite everything, Daniel smiled slightly. When you put it that way, besides, Abby continued, every horror movie ever made proves that splitting up is a terrible idea. We go together or not at all. Daniel considered arguing further, then nodded. All right, together. But we need to prepare carefully. If there's even a chance this ritual is meant to be performed, we should understand it fully. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of research. Daniel dug deeper into the Miller family history, uncovering more connections to folk practices brought from Scotland. He consulted discreetly with experts in historical mysticism and ritual practices, presenting his questions as research for an academic paper. The mysterious caller contacted him twice more, providing additional details about the ritual and warning that the barrier continued to thin. Reports of strange occurrences at Antietam had increased, park rangers describing unexplained cold spots, visitors claiming to see soldiers among the trees, and most disturbing, a tourist who had wandered off trail near the West Woods and returned disoriented, speaking in a voice not his own before collapsing. He recovered in the hospital with no memory of the incident. Finally, December 12th arrived. Daniel and Abby drove to Schaubsburg in tense silence, the ritual components packed carefully in Daniel's bag. They checked into the same small hotel as before, planning to rest before heading to the battlefield at 11 p.m. As twilight settled over the small town, Daniel stood at the window, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. His phone buzzed with a final text. The door opens soon. They are gathering. Be prepared for what you may see. Trust nothing that tries to prevent the ritual. Encouraging, Abby commented, reading over his shoulder. We can still back out, Daniel offered, giving her one last chance to distance herself from whatever awaited them. Abby shook her head firmly. Not a chance, Professor. Whatever happens tonight, we face it together. As night deepened toward midnight, they drove to Antietam National Battlefield Park. The main gates were closed, but their research had revealed a service road used by maintenance staff that would get them close to the West Woods. They parked there and continued on foot, using flashlights to navigate the familiar path. The night was unnaturally still. No wind stirred the bare branches overhead, no animals called in the darkness. Even their footsteps seemed muffled, as if the world itself were holding its breath. They reached the clearing with the well at 11:45 p.m. In the beam of their flashlights, it looked ordinary, just an old stone structure, partially collapsed and covered with a rusted metal plate. But as they approached, Daniel felt a strange sensation, like static electricity raising the hair on his arms. Do you feel that? He whispered. Abby nodded, her face pale in the flashlight beam, like pressure in my ears. Like before a storm. Daniel set down his bag and began removing the ritual components, the small pouch of herbs and stones, the handwritten instructions, a silver knife he'd purchased based on the drawings in the ritual guide, and a small clay bowl, according to these instructions. I need to create a circle around the well using the contents of this pouch, he explained, his academic tone belying the surreality of the situation. Then at midnight exactly, I recite the names of 7 generations of Millers while adding a drop of blood of the bloodline, to the bowl. And that will close the door? Abby asked, scanning the darkened woods around them nervously. According to our mysterious guide, yes. It completes what Thornton tried to do 161 years ago. As Daniel arranged the materials, the air grew noticeably colder. Their breath fogged visibly now, and frost began forming on the ground around them, spreading outward from the well in crystalline patterns. It's happening, Abby whispered. Daniel checked his watch. 11:55 p.m. He began creating the circle, carefully sprinkling the mixture of herbs and small stones around the well's perimeter, trying to match the patterns shown in the instructions. At 11:58, he completed the circle. The temperature had dropped dramatically now, cold enough to make his fingers stiff as he unfolded the paper with the ritual words. I need to remove the well cover, he told Abby. According to this, the offering must be made directly above the opening. Together, they pushed aside the heavy metal cover, revealing a dark opening below. No bottom was visible in their flashlight beams, just a seemingly endless darkness that swallowed the light. The watch on Daniel's wrist ticked over to midnight, and somewhere in the darkness below something moved. The first indication that something had changed was the sound, a low, humming vibration that seemed to emanate from the well itself, felt more than heard. The frost patterns on the ground began to shimmer, glowing with a faint bluish light that traced intricate, snowflake-like designs across the clearing. Professor, Abby whispered, her voice tense, I think we need to start the ritual. Now, Daniel nodded, unfolding the paper with the ritual words. His hands trembled slightly, though whether from the cold or from fear, he couldn't say. He positioned himself at the edge of the well, the clay bowl in one hand, the silver knife in the other. "I need to recite 7 names," he explained, steadying his voice. "7 generations of the Miller family, ending with Mary Miller Thornton." He began to speak, his academic's mind clinging to the historical aspect of what he was doing. These were real people, ancestors whose blood supposedly flowed in his veins. Alastair Miller, who came from Scotland. Elspeth Miller, who established the homestead. William Miller, who dug this well. Margaret Miller, who first sensed its power. Joseph Miller, who fought in the Revolution. Thomas Miller, who expanded the farm. Mary Miller, who married James Thornton. With each name, the humming intensified. The glow from the frost patterns brightened, casting eerie blue-white light across their faces. The darkness within the well seemed to deepen, becoming almost tangible, like a physical presence rising toward the opening. Daniel picked up the silver knife. According to the instructions, he needed to add blood of the bloodline to complete the ritual. He pressed the blade against his palm, steeling himself. "Wait," Abby said suddenly, grabbing his wrist. "Do you hear that?" Above the humming came another sound, voices, distant but growing clearer. Men's voices calling in confusion, in anger, in pain. From the surrounding woods, shadows began to detach themselves from the trees, moving toward the clearing with uneven gaits. The soldiers, Daniel breathed, recognizing the shapes of Civil War uniforms, the outlines of caps and haversacks and rifles. The dead of Antietam. The figures entered the circle of light cast by the glowing frost. Their features were indistinct, like faces viewed underwater, constantly shifting and reforming. But their voices grew clearer, a cacophony of pleas and demands. "Help us. Let us through. We've waited so long. Home. We want to go home." Daniel felt pulled in different directions by their calls. Some voices seemed genuinely lost, confused, seeking release from a century and a half of limbo. Others held a darker undertone, hungry and demanding. "The ritual," Abby urged. "Complete it." Daniel turned back to the well, raising the knife again. But before he could make the cut, a single figure pushed through the crowd of shadows, more solid than the others, wearing the uniform of a Union sergeant. Thornton. Daniel recognized him immediately from the photograph. The figure nodded, his features clearer than the others, though still wavering like a reflection in disturbed water. "Professor Mercer. You came." "I'm trying to close the door," Daniel explained, gesturing to the ritual materials. "To finish what you started." Thornton's expression grew urgent. "The door must be closed, but not sealed. Not yet." He pointed to the well. "They're using it. The hungry ones. The ones who were never men, who wore our faces after we fell. They've been waiting for this night." Daniel frowned, confusion cutting through his fear. "I don't understand." "The ritual is supposed to close the doorway completely and trap us here forever," one of the other shadows called out, its voice bitter. "Caught between worlds while they find another way through." "Listen carefully," Thornton said, moving closer to Daniel. His form flickered as he approached the edge of the ritual circle but didn't cross it. "When we died here, thousands of us in a single day, it tore something, created a wound between worlds. Most passed through normally, to whatever waits beyond. But some of us became caught, trapped in the in-between, and something else found that opening." Another soldier added, his accent distinctly southern, a Confederate, Daniel realized. "They were never human," Thornton continued. "Ancient things that hunger for life, for sensation. They found those of us trapped in the in-between, weak and confused, began to wear our faces, our memories, used us as vessels, as disguises." The humming from the well grew louder. The darkness within it seemed to roil now, like black smoke coiling upward. "The ritual as written will close the door completely," Thornton explained urgently. "Seal us all here, both the lost soldiers and the things wearing our faces. But it needs to be modified. We need a way out while they remain trapped." "How?" Daniel demanded, aware of the darkness rising ever higher in the well. Thornton pointed to the ritual paper. The final line. "Instead of sealing the door, create a gate. One that we can pass through but they cannot." How do I modify it? I don't even understand the language it's written in. "Blood of the bloodline freely given," Thornton recited. "Not on the earth, but on the threshold itself." Daniel looked down at the well's edge where he stood. "The threshold ... the well opening?" Thornton nodded, and the words at the end. "Not close and seal, but open for the worthy, close to the fallen." The darkness in the well had nearly reached the top now. Among the shadowy soldiers surrounding the clearing, a change was occurring. Some remained as they were, indistinct but recognizably human in form. Others began to distort, their shapes elongating, features melting and reforming into something never born of woman. "They can't maintain the disguise as the door opens wider," Thornton explained, backing away from the increasingly distorted figures. Their true nature shows. How do I know which is which? Daniel asked, knife poised above his palm. How do I know which to let through? You'll know, Thornton said simply. Blood calls to blood. Daniel looked at Abby, who stood wide-eyed at the edge of the clearing, witnessing the impossible scene unfolding before them. Do it, she urged. Trust your instincts. Daniel drew the blade across his palm, feeling the sharp sting as blood welled from the cut. He held his hand over the well's edge, allowing drops to fall directly into the darkness below. Open for the worthy, he intoned, departing from the written ritual. Close to the fallen, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The darkness in the well seemed to split, like a curtain torn down the middle. Through the opening, a warm golden light spilled forth, illuminating the clearing far more brightly than the frost patterns had. The shadowy soldiers reacted instantly. Those who had remained human in form moved toward the light, expressions of wonder and relief on their wavering faces. Thornton among them pausing only to nod once more to Daniel before stepping toward the well. Thank you, he said simply, for finishing what I couldn't. The others, the distorted ones, shrieked in rage and frustration. They lunged toward the light but seemed unable to approach the well, as if an invisible barrier repelled them. Their forms stretched and twisted into increasingly nightmarish configurations, only vaguely humanoid now. It's working, Abby breathed, moving to Daniel's side. The ritual is separating them. One by one, the human figures approached the well and simply dissolved into the light, their forms becoming transparent before disappearing entirely. With each departure, their expressions transformed tension and confusion, giving way to peace. The other entities grew more frenzied as their potential vessels escaped. Several lunged toward Daniel and Abby, only to be stopped at the edge of the herb circle, howling in rage. They can't cross the barrier, Daniel realized. The ritual's holding them back while letting the soldiers through. The procession continued. For what felt like hours but might have been minutes' time seemed fluid in the strange light from the well. It's time for me to go, Thornton said, standing at the well's edge. The door must be sealed completely once we've passed through, or they'll eventually find another way. How do I seal it? Daniel asked. The ritual words are correct for that part. Close and seal for 7 generations. Speak them when I've gone through. Then replace the cover immediately. Thornton's form had grown more transparent as he spoke, the golden light seeming to shine through him now. One last thing, he said, his voice fading. In my room behind the loose brick beside the fireplace, my final message. For you, I saw you coming, Professor. Across time, I saw you. With those words, he stepped forward and dissolved into the light. The moment he disappeared, the darkness that had been held at bay surged upward, trying to escape the well. The distorted entities redoubled their efforts to breach the circle. Close and seal for 7 generations, Daniel shouted, letting the last drops of his blood fall into the well. The golden light contracted sharply, pulling inward like water down a drain. The darkness followed it, sucked back down into the depths. Daniel and Abby lunged for the heavy metal cover, dragging it back into place over the opening just as the last of the light vanished. The moment the cover settled into place, the frost patterns flared blindingly bright, then shattered like glass, leaving the clearing in darkness save for their flashlight beams. The unnatural cold dissipated almost instantly. In the woods around them, normal night sounds resumed, the rustle of small animals, the distant hoot of an owl. Daniel sank to his knees, suddenly exhausted. Abby knelt beside him, her face pale but determined. It's over? She asked. For 7 generations, Daniel nodded, according to Thornton. And then what? This happens all over again? I don't know, but I think we just helped hundreds of soldiers finally find peace after more than a century and a half of being trapped. They gathered the ritual materials in silence, both still processing what they had witnessed. As they prepared to leave, Daniel cast one final glance at the well. It looked ordinary now, just an old stone structure in a clearing, a relic of a farm long gone, a silent witness to one of history's bloodiest days. He said he left something for me, Daniel remembered, in his room, behind a loose brick. Then I guess we have one more stop to make, Abby said, leading the way back toward the path. Neither saw the thin tendril of darkness that seeped from beneath the well cover as they departed, curling briefly in the night air before dissipating like smoke. Neither heard the faint whisper that lingered briefly in the clearing. 7 generations passed quickly, Guardian. The drive back to Worcester the next day was quiet, both Daniel and Abby lost in their own thoughts. The events at the well had fundamentally altered their understanding of reality, opening questions neither their academic training nor personal beliefs had prepared them to address. Do you think anyone would believe us if we told them? Abby finally asked as they crossed into Massachusetts. Daniel shook his head. We have no evidence beyond our own testimony. The ritual components are mundane objects. The frost patterns disappeared. Even the identification disc and Thornton's journals could be explained away as elaborate forgeries. So what do we do with this knowledge? It was a profound question that Daniel had been pondering since they left Antietam. I don't know, he admitted, but I think Thornton's final message might offer some guidance. The Thornton house stood quiet in the winter afternoon light, looking much as it had during their previous visit. This time, however, no mysterious woman awaited them inside. The rooms were empty, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the entryway. They went directly to Thornton's bedroom. The fireplace dominated one wall, a simple brick hearth with a wooden mantel. Daniel knelt beside it, examining the bricks carefully. Here, he said after a moment, finding one that protruded slightly. This one's loose. He worked it free carefully, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside lay a sealed envelope, yellowed with age but remarkably well preserved. Daniel's name was written on the front in familiar handwriting, Thornton's distinctive script. That's impossible, Abby whispered. He couldn't have known your name in 1862. He said he saw me coming, Daniel reminded her, breaking the wax seal carefully. Across time he saw me. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Thornton's handwriting. The letter was dated December 10th, 1862, 2 days before his final disappearance. Professor Mercer, it began, the use of his name and title sending a chill down Daniel's spine. If you are reading this, then what I glimpsed across the veil of time has come to pass. You found my trail of breadcrumbs. You came to Antietam. You helped complete what I could not finish alone, Daniel read aloud, his voice steady despite the strangeness of holding a letter addressed to him by a man dead for over a century and a half. The door's sealed now, but not forever. 7 generations, I was told. 7 generations until the alignment returns and the barrier thins once more. I do not know how such knowledge came to me, whether from my Miller ancestors' sensitivity to such things, or from my time spent in the in-between after Antietam, or perhaps from the entities themselves, planting seeds in my mind during my dreams. What I do know is this. You are part of a chain of guardians stretching back through my family line and forward into a future I will never see. The knowledge must be preserved, the warning passed down, so that when the time comes again, someone will be prepared. The things we trapped, they are patient. They exist outside our understanding of time. They will wait and watch and search for other ways through. The well at Antietam is merely one doorway of many, though a powerful one due to the massive death that occurred there in a single day. My research in these final days has uncovered other potential thresholds, places where many died suddenly, where grief and trauma tore the veil between worlds, battlefields, disaster sites, places of execution or massacre, all potential doors for those who know how to open them. I entrust to you the responsibility I cannot fulfill. Record what you have learned. Preserve the ritual knowledge. Identify the other doorways. And find the next guardian who will carry this burden when you no longer can. The entities cannot be destroyed, only contained. They hunger for our world, for the sensations of flesh, for the complexity of human emotion. They would wear us like garments, hollowing us from within. You may wonder why I have not shared this knowledge more widely. I tried. In those brief months after my return, I was declared insane, delusional from battlefield trauma. My journals were hidden away by well-meaning family members, my warnings dismissed as the ravings of a broken mind. The truth must be guarded carefully, shared only with those who can bear it without breaking. You found me across time because you were meant to. The bloodline called to you through your research, your fascination with a minor sergeant in a Massachusetts regiment. I have seen glimpses of your time, wonders and horrors beyond my comprehension. Whether these visions are true or merely how my mind interprets information it cannot truly understand, I cannot say. But I know this: human nature remains constant. Skepticism protects most from terrible truths, but blinds them to genuine dangers beyond their understanding. Trust your instincts, Professor. They led you to me. They will lead you to the next guardian when the time comes. With profound respect and gratitude across the ages, SGT. James Willis Thornton, 5th 10th Massachusetts. Volunteer Infantry, December 10, 1862. A postscript followed in slightly shakier handwriting. P.S. I can feel them searching for me even as I write this. My time grows short. The woman who helped you, Catherine's great-granddaughter, will have her own role to play. The chain must not be broken. Daniel lowered the letter slowly, meeting Abby's wide-eyed gaze. He knew, she whispered. Somehow he saw across time and knew you would come. The woman he mentions must be our mysterious caller, Daniel reasoned. A descendant of Thornton's sister, just as she claimed. What do we do now? Daniel carefully folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. What? Thornton asked. Record what we've learned. Identify other potential doorways. Find the next guardian. You're accepting this responsibility? Becoming a what? A supernatural doorkeeper? Daniel smiled faintly at her phrasing. I'm accepting that what we experienced was real, however impossible it seems. And that if it happened once, it could happen again. They left the Thornton house quietly, leaving everything as they had found it save for the letter. Outside, snow had begun to fall, large flakes drifting lazily in the fading afternoon light. I'll understand if you want to distance yourself from this, Daniel told Abby as they reached the car. Your academic career could be jeopardized by association with what most would consider fringe beliefs at best. Delusion at worst. Abby considered this for a long moment, watching the snow accumulate on the windshield. Finally, she shook her head. I saw what happened at Antietam. I can't unsee it. I can't unhear those voices or forget those faces. She turned to face him. Besides, Thornton's letter mentioned finding the next guardian. What if that's not just you? What if it's both of us? Daniel hadn't considered this possibility, but as soon as she voiced it, it felt right. Research partners in conventional history and whatever this is. Exactly. 2 perspectives, 2 methodologies, twice the coverage. She smiled slightly. And someone to confirm you're not losing your mind when you start talking about ghostly Civil War soldiers and interdimensional entities. The drive back to Covington passed more easily, their shared purpose creating a bridge across the strangeness they had witnessed. They discussed practical next steps, secure storage for Thornton's materials, discreet research into other potential thin places, careful documentation of everything they had experienced while memories remained fresh. 7 generations, Abby mused as they neared the university. How long is that typically? In genealogical terms, about 175 years, Daniel calculated, though Thornton specified 161 years for this particular cycle. So the next opening would be in ... 2184, Daniel finished. Long after we're gone. But not after our research is gone, Abby pointed out. Not after the records we create, the knowledge we preserve, the chain of guardians, Daniel nodded. Extending into a future we'll never see. Back in his office, Daniel carefully locked Thornton's letter and the other artifacts in his departmental safe. Tomorrow would begin the real work of processing what they had learned, of integrating impossible knowledge into their understanding of history and reality. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, not the same one as before. The chain continues. Well done, Guardian. We will meet when you're ready. No signature, but he didn't need one. Catherine's great-granddaughter reaching out again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the campus in a pristine white blanket that would be gone by morning. Temporary like human lives, but the knowledge, the responsibility that would endure. 7 generations. It seemed like forever, but Daniel knew better now. Time moved differently when viewed across the span of history. He was just one link in a chain stretching backward to Thornton and forward to guardians not yet born. For now, though, the door was closed. The soldiers had found peace. And whatever lurked beyond the veil remained trapped there, waiting, watching, but contained. Until the next cycle. Until the next guardian took up the vigil. Spring came to Covington University with its usual riot of blooming dogwoods and cherry blossoms. Students sprawled on the quad, enjoying the warming weather. And for Daniel Mercer, a newfound sense of purpose that extended far beyond his academic duties. The months since Antietam had been busy ones. Daniel had published his paper on James Thornton, the official version, documenting the sergeant's military service, his letters home, and his death at Antietam. The paper made no mention of his apparent return, the ritual at the well, or anything that couldn't be verified through conventional historical sources. It had been well received in academic circles, earning him a prestigious speaking engagement at an upcoming Civil War symposium. But his real work occurred after hours in a secure room he and Abby had established in the university's rarely used East Hall Annex. There, they cataloged and cross-referenced reports of supernatural occurrences at battle sites, disaster locations, and places of mass death. They translated the ritual instructions into modern English, documenting the components and procedures with scientific precision. They researched Miller family descendants, creating a genealogical map of potential future guardians. And they waited for Catherine's great-granddaughter to make contact again. On a particularly beautiful April afternoon, as Daniel was grading finals in his office, that contact finally came, not through a text or call, but in person. A knock at his door revealed a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in an elegant navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. Professor Mercer, she said, extending her hand. I think it's time we met properly. I'm Eleanor Jenkins. Daniel recognized her voice immediately, though without the electronic distortion. The woman from the phone calls. Catherine's descendant. She nodded, accepting his gesture to take a seat. I apologize for the theatrics. It was necessary to guide you gradually, to let you discover the truth at a pace you could accept. You orchestrated everything? The photograph, the letters at the Historical Society, the meeting at Antietam? I provided the initial push, she acknowledged. The rest was already in motion, has been for generations. My family has carried Thornton's knowledge since his brief return in 1862. Each generation, a keeper is chosen to monitor the cycle, to watch for signs of thinning barriers, to identify and prepare the next guardian. And you identified me 5 years ago when you published your first paper on the 5th Massachusetts. Your focus on Thornton specifically caught my attention. When I researched your background and discovered the Miller connection, distant though it is, I knew you were the one Thornton had foreseen. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. Why wait until now to meet in person? You needed time to process what happened, to come to terms with your new reality. And I needed to be certain you had accepted the responsibility. She smiled slightly. Your work with Miss Chun in East Hall confirms that you have. Of course, she would know about their research room. Daniel wasn't even surprised anymore. We've been documenting other potential doorways, he told her. Places where the barrier might be thin. Eleanor nodded approvingly. That's excellent work. There are more than you might expect, and not all are tied to historical events you'd recognize. The entities are constantly testing the boundaries, looking for weaknesses. Have you encountered them directly, as we did at Antietam? A shadow crossed her face. Once. At Gettysburg, 15 years ago, a minor breach, quickly contained. But I saw enough to understand what we're protecting against. She straightened in her chair. But that's not why I'm here today. She reached into her bag and removed a small wooden box similar to the one they had found at the well, but newer, the wood polished and the brass fittings gleaming. This belongs to you now, she said, placing it on his desk. The formal recognition of your role as guardian. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside lay a silver pocket watch, intricately engraved with symbols he recognized from the ritual documents. The same circular pattern with its secting vertical line and 3 horizontal marks. This has been passed from guardian to guardian since 1862, Eleanor explained. Catherine had it made after Thornton's final disappearance, using his original watch as a model. Daniel lifted it carefully. Unlike Thornton's shattered timepiece, this one was in perfect working order. The hands moved steadily, marking time in the conventional way. But around the edge of the face, a secondary dial showed different markings, symbols he didn't recognize interspersed with numbers. 23, 46, 69, 92, 115, 138, 161. The cycle tracker, Eleanor explained, seeing his focus on the unusual feature. It measures the years since the last alignment. We're at 161 now, about to reset to 0. And begin the count toward the next opening, Daniel realized. Exactly. The watch is more than symbolic, it's a tool. The guardian carries it always. If the barriers begin to thin prematurely, it will grow cold. If an entity attempts to cross through, the hands will stop. It's an early warning system of sorts. Daniel closed the watch carefully. Thank you for trusting me with this. Eleanor's expression grew serious. The responsibility is greater than you yet understand, Professor. The entities we contain don't exist solely on the other side of physical doorways like the well. They can influence thoughts, appear in dreams, manipulate the vulnerable. Part of your duty is to recognize their subtle incursions and counter them. How? We sealed the doorway, the primary doorway, yes. But think of reality as a fabric. The well at Antietam is a major tear, now mended. But the fabric can still be stretched thin in places, allowing whispers and influences to seep through. Your bloodline makes you sensitive to these attempts, if you learn to recognize them. Daniel thought of the dreams he'd had since. Antietam, vivid visions of soldiers calling to him from shadowy places, of darkness pooling in corners, of voices just below the threshold of hearing. I think I've already experienced this, he admitted. Eleanor nodded. It will grow stronger as you acknowledge it. The abilities of the Miller bloodline aren't supernatural gifts so much as heightened awareness of what most people can't or won't perceive. She stood, smoothing her suit jacket. I've said enough for today. Too much information at once can be counterproductive. Read Thornton's letter again. There are layers of meaning you may have missed initially. And the watch, familiarize yourself with it. Learn its patterns, its responses. Will I see you again? Daniel asked, rising as well. Of course. We're connected now, part of the same chain. My role is to guide you as you grow into your responsibilities, just as someone once guided me. She moved toward the door, then paused. Bring Miss Chun to our next meeting. Her role in this is still developing, but I sense she has her own part to play. After she left, Daniel sat for a long time, holding the Guardian's watch, feeling its steady tick against his palm. Outside, students crossed the quad, laughing and talking, blissfully unaware of hidden doorways and ancient hungers in the thin barriers protecting them. Perhaps that was for the best. As Thornton had written, the truth must be guarded carefully, shared only with those who could bear it without breaking. Daniel slipped the watch into his pocket, where it settled with a weight that felt both strange and somehow right. He was a historionic, keeper of the past, a documenter of human experience across time. This new role was an extension of that calling, protecting not just the knowledge of history but the very fabric of reality that allowed history to unfold. That night, as he drifted towards sleep, the boundary between waking and dreaming growing thin, Daniel thought he heard a familiar voice, Thornton's voice, speaking from a great distance. "The chain holds, Guardian. The chain holds." And for now, at least, that was enough. As Daniel Mercer settled into his new role as Guardian, the ancient watch ticking steadily in his pocket, certain truths became increasingly clear to him. History was not merely a record of the past, but a living force shaping the present. The barriers between worlds required constant vigilance, and some doors once open could never be completely closed, only guarded, generation after generation, by those who understood the terrible responsibility of keeping watch. 7 generations would pass more quickly than anyone might imagine. The entities beyond the veil were patient, eternal, waiting for the smallest crack in the defenses. But the chain of guardians would continue, unbroken, a human bulwark against forces that existed beyond human understanding. Daniel's research, his documentation, his careful preparation for Guardians Not Yet Born, these were his legacy, more important than any academic paper or book he would ever publish. In Thornton's bedroom, now preserved as a museum exhibit, the shadows sometimes shifted in ways that conventional physics couldn't explain. Visitors occasionally reported hearing whispers, feeling a presence, sensing someone watching from just beyond perception. And beneath the rusted cover of an old well in the West Woods at Antietam, something continued to wait, to test the strength of its prison, to seek weaknesses in the seal created by blood of the bloodline. 7 generations. The cycle had reset. The watch ticked on.